Powell, let's face it, different presidents have different agendas. Some may be considered more pro-business, vis-a-vis tax cuts. Others may be considered more socially oriented, such as increases to Medicare benefits, Medicaid benefits, or even unemployment. But using, again, the historical perspective we own, that we can look back and see how different presidents and their agendas have been implemented, how has that actually affected the markets?
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions that people are asking these days, and I think sometimes being a little I wouldn't say anxious, but just wondering about, maybe a little uncertain about taxes and how are taxes going to impact the market, and shouldn't we make the move? Because I've heard from a few folks that, hey, if we have President Biden in the office, oh my gosh, I should sell all my holdings because taxes might go up. Well, there are a few considerations to have there. And I'll start with this, just the big point is that we looked at that issue, and anecdotally, we don't see a link between tax policy and market returns. And let me illustrate what I mean by that. It's not that taxes don't matter, and that's not what I'm saying. It's something different. Is that as an investor, and what returns do you get? Having a president that is focused on tax cuts versus not, does that really matter to you as an investor? And let's look at two examples, two presidents really well known for their tax cuts. And the first one is President Ronald Reagan. Everybody knows the huge tax cuts to the marginal income rates, income tax rates in the 80s. And if you looked at what the market did, if you had invested $1 in the U.S. stock market, in the S&P 500, when he walked into the White House and took office, by the time he left 8 years later, it would have more than tripled to $3.24. So a significant growth, triple the money in 8 years during a president who was really, really focused on tax cuts and very business friendly. The second one is President George W. Bush. We had not one round of tax cuts, but two, and some specifically directed towards investments, capital gains and dividends and so forth. And yet $1 invested when he took office, by the time he left 8 years later, it would have turned into a mere 70 cents. So to me, tax policy and tax cuts are not a guarantee that you're going to see good market results. It's just not. And on the other hand, you have somebody who has more social programs on the agenda, higher priority on the agenda, and that's President Obama. Obviously, we know Obamacare, which has helped tremendously so many people, and yet when you look at the market, $1 invested at the beginning of his tenure would have tripled to $3.28 by the time he left, which is remarkable because it is almost identical to what happened during President Reagan. So whether you have a president that has social programs in mind, and so many people were concerned, like, we have a socialist in the White House, and oh my gosh, we're done with this. And yet the market did pretty much identically to what it did during the Reagan years. So it's not clear to me that you should bail out of the market because of this. More so, among these folks so far, except for President Ford, President Clinton had a very high average over his tenure, even though we did have some tax increases in that time. And again, it didn't really seem to impact the market. And that drives to a bigger point that I think it's worth making, Kevin, that taxes are a complicated thing. And I know, you have White Plains, it's New York. I live in California. And I'm not speaking out of place here, but whenever we had the tax cuts from a few years ago, the impact on those tax cuts was quite uneven. You heard so many stories that in some parts of the country, the taxes went down for folks. In other parts of the country, New York and California, for example, they actually went up for quite a significant number of people because you couldn't deduct the state and local taxes. So even when you have a tax cut, it might not materialize into actually keeping more money in your pocket. For many people, it wasn't a tax cut. And even so, the last point that I'll make on this, if people are concerned, well, what if President Biden comes and maybe the tax rates for companies goes up? Well, up until 3 years ago, they were pretty high. I mean, we're relative to the rest of the world. Now they're really low relative to the rest of the world. But did companies not operate? Did the market not do well before the last round of tax cuts? Not at all. It was doing just fine. companies will find a way to make it work. They'll create a subsidiaries in some other country and then do some, transfer pricing to put assets there and recognize profits in a lower tax jurisdiction. They've done this for years. I mean, if not, more than decades and decades. So it's nothing new. If the tax rate changes, they'll figure it out. If they get to keep a little bit less than they do now, it's not devastating. It's not a catastrophe. And I'm not sure why this thought that I don't think I've ever heard somebody saying we're going to take the entire profits that a company makes. No, even if the tax rates go up a little bit, there was a big tax cut, and these companies will figure it out. And it's exactly the same for individuals. For many years, tax rates were pretty high. And frankly, there are investment products like tax managed funds who are designed specifically to address these needs. Now, after the Bush tax cuts, they weren't on the front burner as much as they were. But trust me, Pareto has tools at their disposal, whether in terms of investment solutions or strategies they do to mitigate taxes. It's not something new. So even if taxes go up, as I said, and I don't know that why it's such a doom and gloom. We've seen higher taxes, and I'll come back to this perhaps later. But I don't particularly think that should be the reason that you should sell out of the market. There is no evidence to show that would lead to a bad result for you as an investor.
Again, thanks for being with us today, and please follow us on all our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We look forward to seeing you on the other side.